Iowa. Can someone tell me when Iowa became a state? I'm an old teacher here. I got to have some knowledge here. Anybody have any guess? 46. Okay. Excellent, excellent. Okay. Now, does anyone know when Centerville was incorporated? Guesses? Okay, in 1855. Okay? And about that time, the following year, Jonathan and Joseph and Sarah Houston, not Houston, Houston, come to Centerville to establish a furniture dealership. Now, I want you to imagine Appanoose County in the 1850s. Guesses on how many people lived in Appanoose County? 100? Couple hundred. 605. You might wonder, where did they get that specific? It was, the census was taken that year. So they said 605. Now, how many people do you suppose lived in Centerville? Oh, it was called Chaldea then. Guesses? 495. 71. That's smaller than Unionville, Iowa. So as Joseph and Sarah come here to have this new place, this furniture store, think about what they saw. There wasn't really anything here. But they went ahead and they established themselves here, and he and his wife, they had 8 children who, as they got older, they left and went on to different places one by one. And those 25 years, Sarah got involved in the community. They started the Presbyterian Church. But the year came to be 1889, which, by the way, was the date that my grandfather was born. In 1889, there was a fire on the square, and all the buildings were wood. And there were 2 guys sitting outside in the middle of the night. One guy's name was Wright, and the other guy's name was Spooner. I can't imagine it was him, but maybe part of his family. But I want you to think about, what the heck were they doing after midnight on an early Sunday morning, sitting outside a harness shop in the middle of town? I would say they were maybe tipping a few, just going along. And they think they smell something, some like coal oil burning, but they're not really sure. And then they decided that, gosh darn, that smell's getting worse. And so they decided that they better go check it out. So they looked in the window of the furniture shop, and they see flames. So they immediately call the police, which is actually running down and telling the police, and the firefighters, and the firefighters come, and they have a bucket brigade because they don't have running water, and they don't have enough water. And by this time, the residents of the town, which is about 300 or 400 people, everybody's there. Everybody wants to see what's going on. And they decide that they're not going to be able to stop this, because in the back of that furniture store was furniture supplies, glues, and Mr. Houston had also become an undertaker. So there were embalming fluids and that kind of stuff that was also there. And it was on fire. Everybody came and said, I think this whole block's going to go. So they all ran inside, took all the merchandise out as much as they could, not everything, but almost everything, and cleaned out that area and then watched it burn. Now, there are some reports that this is on the west side of the square. Other reports said it's on the east side of the square where this happened. They said it burned everything to Jefferson. Well, on the old city maps, Jefferson is where Haynes Avenue is now. But other people say it was definitely on the west. So wherever you want to have it, that's okay. So those landmarks were gone, and they put up new brick buildings. And when in this fire, they had a millinery shop, 2 grocery stores, 2 restaurants, a jewelry store, a law office, a stove and second-hand shop, a sewing machine place, and most of the merchants were okay with everything going down because they had something new: insurance. And that was a relatively new thing that they had had. So Joseph and his wife, unlike most everybody else who rebuilt, they did not. They waited a year, and then they decided to go to Chicago and live with some of their children, Frank and Sherman. The following year, Joseph passes away, and he is brought back here, and he is buried somewhere over in the older part of the cemetery. Now, it's interesting to say that on that particular day that Dr. Strudevant also had died, and his funeral was the same day. So it was a major, major event. Now, Frank, this is his monument. You can see it's pretty mighty. It must mean that he had a lot of money. And yeah, he did. And Frank and Sherman had a hardwood timber business. Now, this wasn't just some little sawmill down the road. This was massive. They had massive yards in Chicago. In southern Illinois, they had a distribution center. They bought timberland in Mississippi, 165,000 acres of timber in Mississippi. To give you a perspective, Lake Rathman is 11,000 acres. They bought 165,000 acres of this hardwood. And Frank, his brother, seems to disappear from the picture, and Frank goes ahead and he works about 18 years, then he retires. And he's involved in all kinds of things. He enjoys all kinds of livelihoods. He goes to the country club, he does this, he does that. And he lived in a hotel, the Chicago Bench Hotel. And when he passes away in 1925, he decides in his will, he liked that hotel so well that he left the manager $10,000. So he said he loved that, living in that place, and he must have. But he wanted to be buried with his family, so he was brought here to be buried, and he left his money in a trust for his family, that as long as they were alive, they could live off of this trust. Then when they had all died, he would divide up the money. Just so I get it right. 1/4 would go to the Salvation Army. 1/4 would go to the home for the destitute children. 1/4 would go to an old person's home. And 1/4 would come to 3 Centerville churches: the Presbyterian, the Methodist, and the Baptist. Because he thought it was really important to support your community. Even though he hadn't lived here, he remembered all of his childhood here. And that is the Houston family. Frank, Sarah, and Joseph, all major contributors to our community. Thank you.